Two cases of mistaken identity. The raven and the goose, both domesticated animals, very valuable to mankind, were mistaken for wild things. Now the birds I just showed you, the myna birds, they're wild, and they're the little sister of the raven and the crow. And they're very, very smart too. They'll talk and they're friendly, but the raven is another matter. By the way, these are ravens, not crows. Big difference. In fact, the identifying them as a crow is almost as bad as a wild thing, because people didn't like crows. When I grew up, California had a 50-cent a piece bounty on crows. Farmers hated them. But ravens are very different. They don't flock up, they go in pairs. Our raven, the alala, is probably the most intelligent of all the ravens. Yes, more vocabulary than any other raven, and they use tools. These are very, very smart birds. It's a good idea to go back on the history of some of this. How did this come to be? Edgar Allan Poe, nevermore. The question is, the mistaken identity, the wild birds, have got us caught up in a very good law, but in this case poorly applied. So let's go back. Let's take a look at how this all started. Back, 1,000, maybe 2,000 years ago, Hawaii was a bird paradise. Now, it wasn't easy to get to paradise for birds. These are the honey creepers, much studied by evolutionists. Because if you were a bird and you managed to get your mate across 2,000-3,000 miles of ocean and find paradise, well, there wasn't any competition. So these famous honey creepers, two little birds, not many little birds got here, but two little birds evolved into all of these different birds. Yes, and so it was a good place, and you could change into the better forms by evolution very quickly. The really big birds, they could make it more easily. So the people that study bones came up with 40 to 50 geese species. Yeah, before Hawaiians got here, while bird paradise was still alive, 40 to 50 species of geese. 4 or 5 species of ravens. Yes. In fact, the alala, we know, the Hawaiian raven, was the smallest of the 4 or 5. Well, that makes sense if you're going to take it in your home. But it's not a crow. It's a raven. It's a raven. And the only reason they're in the wild is because they lost their homes. They're homeless. Of course, a lot of those birds had lost the ability to fly. Even our raven doesn't like to. He's a climber, got big gnarly feet. and so when the Hawaiians showed up, all these birds walking around the ground, oh boy, chicken and turkey for dinner and breakfast and lunch. And the dogs and the pigs and the rats that came with Hawaiians had a field day. It didn't take long before most of those birds were gone. The raven and the goose turned out to be very valuable and moved right in with Hawaiians, and for the last 1,000 years or more have lived happily as domesticated animals, while all the other birds pretty much were gone. Hawaii's famous for having birds go extinct, you know. So how did we get to this situation we're in now? Well, we're very lucky because we have a place where some very fine observers came to Hawaii and recorded all their observations. It wasn't just Captain Cook. There was 2 other co-captains, Captain Clark and Captain King. 2 ships. They were naturalists. They were going around the world looking at new cultures and they took specimens, and they were looking for valuable plants and valuable animals to take back to England. And so they were very interested in the birds of Hawaii. Captain Cook said he estimated 200,000 people lived along the west coast of the island of Hawaii. He did this by counting the rooftops and multiplying times 7 or 8 or something. Let's say 10. Let's say there was only 20,000 houses. Well, then Cook went on and said, in the same paragraph, the most common house pet was a large black bird. Now, half of those houses had, birds in them. That's 10,000, birds. Happily living in the homes, inside the houses, climbing around underneath the roofs, taking out the rats, the centipedes, the scorpions, all the bad stuff you don't want. The raven took care of it happily. And Ala was built to climb around upside down underneath a Hawaiian rooftop, a thatched hut, and clean out the thatch. Boy, they were great helpers, besides being very intelligent and talking. Well, this is a good time to get into some of the evidence that these two birds were domesticated. And it wasn't just Captain Cook that wrote about them, but the other two captains did also. Captain King especially would get out there and walk around a lot. Listen to what Captain King had to say here. I've already mentioned in former account the quadrupeds and fishes. We have no more to add, but we've seen a greater variety of birds. To the crimson-colored one, dark green bird, its bill. Anyway, he describes some of these birds, including the long curved bill, a small pale green bird, another with dirty mixed feathers. Anyway, these birds they brought to us alive. We had also brought to us by the natives a dull green and dark, well, that's another colored dove. Ravens were also seen. Here we go. And some of these were kept about their homes, about their houses. And they had some superstitious notions about them because they called one an Iato'oa. They had geese, tame, but we supposed them taken while young, as we did not ever see them at their houses. Well, you didn't leave the baby geese out in the yard, because pigs, rats, they'd be goners. So you had to keep the little baby geese inside until they were big enough to defend. So it stands to reason you wouldn't see the baby geese out there. But also, it means they found some baby ravens in the homes. Well, that's according to Captain King. Here's another reference. I got this from the Captain Cook Society in Australia. He said after March 1979, when Cook had been killed, Captain Clerk assumed command and wrote details of the plants and animals that he had seen. He noted, ravens are found here, but they are scarce. See, he didn't go in the homes. Clerk stayed on the ship. Their color is dark brown, so they were scarce in the wild, and their note is different from those in Europe. In the same month, Captain King also wrote about it, said ravens were here and kept in their houses. They knew the difference between a crow and a raven. Ravens are all over the world. The British Empire keeps those ravens up in the London Tower. It said if they're gone, the British kingdom will be gone. So they're very famous. They talk and they have their own chef and everybody knows their names. And in the Middle Ages, there was a pair of ravens in every little village. So there's a raven named Jimmy that you see in the movies that made a lot of money in Hollywood. He's in all the old Jimmy Stewart movies. Quote the Raven, Nevermore by Edgar Allan Poe. Wild raven came in his door, sat on a bust of Pallas and said, "Nevermore." 3 very observant naturalists. When Captain Clerke brought the ships into London after his voyage, he had 120 chests full of specimens. A lot of them were skins of birds to preserve the feathers. Now bear in mind, these guys had been all over the world. So when they got to Hawaii, they had a lot of old cultures to compare it to. Now this is very significant passage. Check this one out. It has been remarked by voyagers that the Society and Friendly Islands pay adoration to particular birds. He's talking about the South Pacific. And it seems to be a custom that in prevalence in here, that in these islands, that ravens are perhaps the objects of it here. For Mr. King saw 2 of these birds perfectly tame at the village of Kaka'ao, and was told they were iato'ois. Somebody said that meant sacred. Another Hawaiian lady told me that was noisy. They were noisy birds. He offered several articles for them, which were all refused, and he was particularly cautioned not to hurt or offend them. These were the pets of the Hawaiians. Now, they would do a lot to get a piece of iron. They would, they were addicted to gambling here on the same page. It's funny. Anyway, reading Cook, you find out these were very healthy, happy people. And ravens and geese were domesticated. Yes. It's a neat thing about bird feathers. They don't lose their color. Captain Cook was given a beautiful red feather down in the South Pacific because they love their birds there. And it was so valuable, he gave it as a gift to King Kamehameha. So Hawaiians didn't kill the birds. They would trap them, and they would take feathers off them. That was pure gold. Some of the areas above Kona were feather areas. Guys would lay there and cover themselves with leaves and put a little piece of bait in their fingers, and as soon as the bird landed there to get the bait, bang, they'd grab them, take the right feathers off, and release them. They knew birds, these Hawaiians, so knowing that they cherished the ala and the nene, it's important. They had their pick of these 2 special species. And after they picked them, they lived with them for over 1,000 years. This book details the early days when they got the first few ravens and trapped them. And I remember when the guy sprayed Roundup and killed 2 out of 3 birds they had. But if you want to find out about these birds, these guys were some of the final. There's a few left in the wild. They didn't last very long. Got to realize that Hawaiians all died very quickly, from 200,000 people, and in a couple of decades they were down to 2,000 people in Kona. Where'd all the birds go? Well, they all headed for the hills. They lost their homes. But, they didn't last very long in the so-called wild. So there was very few of them by the time that our biologists and the endangered species law came along. And Saving the Raven, this book, if you want to find out more about it, the people that did that grew to love these individual ravens. They're very lovable. The answer is to sell these birds in pairs, mated pairs, to hotels, zoos, like very valuable parrots, and we will save the species. Once you understand they're domestic pets, ridiculous to put them out in the wild. You're throwing them out of their homes into very dangerous places, wasting the gene pile. No, more better, we put them in survivable places. Lots of hotels would like to have a pair of ravens. Yeah, lots of other places, lots of specialists. Folks, volunteer. Volunteer. Write or call these people. Yeah, or these people. Or the San Diego Zoo, which is a major sponsor. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that would like to save this most valuable bird to humanity